Davies, and you're watching Hello Denver, Are You Still There? Right here on PBS 12. This show is a conversation about Denver, with Denver, and for Denver. On the show today, I have my friend Julia E. Torres. Julia is an educator and librarian at the Montbello Campus Library in the far northeast region of Denver Public Schools. She is also on the executive boards and steering committees for the National Council of Teachers of English, the Book Love Foundation, and the Educolor Collective. Julia, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so good to see your face again. It's been forever. So much has happened since we've seen one another. The world is on fire.
I know.
I'm just happy to be here with you. So thank you for inviting me.
Oh, well, thank you for being on the show. I know we talk a lot on Twitter, but it's different when you get to talk to each other in real life. So
it is.
This is our real lives, right?
This is the best we can get right now.
Well, Julia, I gave a brief introduction to all of the many things that you do. So maybe if you could just tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do, that would be awesome.
I am a Denver Public Schools teacher librarian. So that means that I work with students through grades 6 through 12. That is something that I have done. I've been a language arts teacher, so I'm a veteran language arts teacher, and I became the campus librarian this is my third year, so 2 years ago. Outside of that, outside of Denver Public Schools, I do work with several national organizations. Book Love Foundation is one of them. Nonprofit dedicated to bringing school libraries or bringing classroom libraries into schools. So the Book Love Foundation has founded millions of dollars worth of grants that classroom teachers use to be able to fund classroom libraries. And then I also work with the Educolor Collective, which is a collective of educators of color that is working for liberatory education, what we call education that supports student liberation from the oppressive structures within the education system, as well as various other systems out there. And then I'm also a part of the National Council for Teachers of English. This is my last year of a 2-year elected term as their secondary representative at large, which means I am representing the interests of language arts teachers across the United States on the executive board of the oldest national organization for language arts teachers there is.
It's to me, it's really pressing that we talk about the current experience that students are having, as well as teachers and librarians. And what I think about when I think about a library, I think about the space that you inhabit. And I know that that's something that you really value in terms of the thing that you brought to students is that space to be and to explore and to learn and all of those things. So what does your work look like as a librarian right now in the current space that we're in terms of quarantine and doing a lot of things remotely, and sort of what is your interaction, or sort of what does your work look like day to day with your students?
So typically what will happen is, and this was the way it was before we went into quarantine, educators will contact me and say that they would like some help planning, developing lessons, or executing lessons, or they want independent reading support. So those are the 3 main things that I do, in addition to library cataloging and the clerical work of being a librarian. So you can kind of put my work in 2 buckets. One of the buckets is instructional support and working directly with students. And then another one is curating the collection, weeding books from the collection, circulation, and all of those things. So right now, as far as weeding the collection goes, I've put that on pause. I wasn't able to do the end of the year inventory and weed. When we say weeding the collection, we pull books that don't get circulated so that our library can accommodate the books that will circulate. So I'm constantly monitoring and running reports about the circulation and what books are popular in my student population, so that I can make sure that the collection represents their interests and that I'm truly cultivating young readers rather than just building a collection of books based on, what other folks would like to read, because we want the collection to reflect the local interests and the student population. And I work with some very talented folks in Denver Public Schools whose full-time job is to support people like me in curating collections that reflect the student population. So what does it look like? Teachers will reach out to me. They'll say they need me to Zoom into or Google Meet into one of their classes. I just did a couple yesterday. So I join the class, and then I instructed the kids about how to write a book review. So I gave a lesson on how to do a book review, showed them the online resources, and then another part of my job is to communicate with educators about what resources there are online to support independent reading at home, especially right now during the pandemic. So every week I send out a weekly newsletter to staff and administrators in the building about online resources to support independent reading.
When you talk about sort of like weeding and I wouldn't necessarily say curating, because definitely it is led by you, but also you're saying it's what your students are reading or what your students are interested in. Have you seen anything or any interest or requests for books or just areas of books that are being read more now that we're looking at not only this era of working in these new spaces, quarantine wise, but also with the change, the actual the uprisings that we're seeing socially, and I'm trying to think of like, what are students really, are they connecting with what is going on socially in terms of like social change and the uprisings we're seeing socially around things like police violence and bigger conversations like that?
Yes, because I do my very best to have the collection reflect the interests of the schools as well. And one of my schools was founded on principles of social justice and global education. So we try to keep the students informed about what's going on in the world around them so that it can be a pedagogy, which is your practice, plus your praxis, which is your beliefs about education, or praxis is pedagogy plus practice. Anyway, sorry for screwing that up. But anyway, I want our students to understand that their responsibility in this world is to learn about social justice and what is their position in relation to other folks who might be experiencing more or less oppression and marginalization than they are. So that's part of the work that we do. Another part of my job is to curate a collection that represents the diverse population in Montbello. So the students want books in their languages. So I have a lot of West African students, for example, that speak French. So having books that will speak to their lived experiences, that's really important. A lot of kids want horror books right now, to be quite honest with you. They want to read horror. So I am actively looking for authors of color that write horror, and there aren't very many. There are two that I know of right now that I am professional acquaintances with, Tiffany D. Jackson and Lamar Giles. Those are kind of the only two authors of color that are writing horror right now for young folks.
Do you have any sort of ideas anecdotally about why your students are really navigating towards the genre of horror?
I mean, to be quite honest with you, I think that everything is leaning toward horror. I think we're kind of living in a horrific dystopian type of reality right now. But I also think a lot of what goes on in Hollywood is desensitizing. A lot of what happens on social media is desensitizing. They live in the information age. So I don't think that they have the same emotional or psychological responses to fictional horror that I would have, or someone from a different generation. That's at least what I've perceived so far. And that's talking about students as a whole, which is dangerous because there's so many different identities within the group of students as a whole. But I can just speak to kind of the trends that I've observed. They want to read fictionalized horror stories, and they actually like to watch it on TV as well.
That's interesting because I mean, I think about the role of science fiction in when we're trying to look at social change. The best way often is to imagine the reality that you want to see, because historically it has not existed to represent so many, especially young people. It's not representative of young people. And so I always think about the sci-fi aspect of it, but I didn't think about the horror aspect. And that is such a fascinating thing, but also kind of cool. I think students are clearly probably processing a lot of things through the art form and genre of horror, My students tend to have different reactions to things that I would consider to be traumatizing in real life. So, for example, if there's some kind of a scandal that erupts on social media, they don't have nearly the dramatic reaction that I do. So
that might be good. You know, that's maybe they have thicker skin in some ways than I do.
I didn't think about that aspect. Is social media something that you address or find yourself talking about with your students as it relates to, in any way, to literature or what they're reading? I don't know if there's an intersection for students there between their social media lives or experiences and then their experiences with books and what they're reading at the moment.
Yes, because a lot of books will feature social media, which is kind of interesting, especially ones that are written more recently. And then also, I would say that a lot of our students are writing fan fiction. So a way to disseminate fan fiction is through social media. And then part of a librarian's job is to do what we call critical media literacy. So we teach students how to navigate the online spaces and what they read, to separate fact from fiction, to learn how to have a critical eye out of everything that's presented to you online, and to not just be kind of a mindless consumer of everything that's out there.
I think everybody could use media literacy, especially in a time of just the proliferation of the ability to get access to all sorts of information and not necessarily knowing what is a reliable source versus what is not a reliable source. And I can see where young people probably have a actually much more discernible eye because they've grown up with the internet versus sort of our age group and beyond.
Absolutely.
One last thing I guess I'd love to talk to you about is is there anything you're seeing in your students in terms of like needs that aren't being met or experiences that they're having that are really difficult or just something that you could see them needing support on that maybe we wouldn't understand if we haven't talked to a young person lately?
I think that our students know when they're being fed lies. I think they know when adults pretend to know what they're talking about, but really don't. I don't think that anybody could have told me when I was a young person that there was going to be a job called a professional YouTuber and that you were going to make millions through a channel online, a virtual channel that you could record episodes with your phone daily if you want to, and you would get paid. You would be paid by the likes and the clicks. That job didn't exist when I was younger. So I think that it's a farce somewhat to pretend like we know the jobs that they're going to hold when they become adults. So the best thing that we can do for them, I think, is to step into a position of mentorship, give them the wisdom that we have achieved, but then also listen to them and amplify their voices. I think that a lot of students feel ignored. They feel like their voices are not heard. They feel like we talk down to them a lot and like we don't respect their lived realities or their experiences or their opinions. And so we can do a better job about uplifting those.
If there's one last thing that you want to say or a place that I can direct people to support, or if there's an organization or something that you'd like folks to learn more about related to what you do, where can I send folks?
So right now, an important initiative is #WeBuildEdu, and it is uplifting the voices of educators of color. We are 20% of the workforce. 80%, almost 90% of educators in the United States identify as white. So it's really important that we uplift the voices of educators of color so that students can see what they might one day decide to be. Otherwise, it's always going to be this paradigm. And we know that by the year 2022, there are going to be more students of color than white students in public schools. So go to National Education Statistics if you want more information about that. Educolor.org is a phenomenal organization. Please support in whatever ways that you can. And then, of course, Penny Kittle's Book Love Foundation. I have a big, big place in my heart for folks who donate to the Book Love Foundation, because being able to give teachers classroom libraries is a huge, huge gift.
Julia, thank you for being here and for talking with me today.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Of course, it's always a joy to talk to you, and it's just enlightening to know what the experiences you transmit to the larger world about what students are experiencing is really helpful. So thank you so much.
Of course, I'm very proud to be a part of the Denver community, and I'm super happy to be so close to you. So that even though we have to see each other virtually right now, I'm a big fan of your work and I support the things that you do. And I'm proud to be affiliated with you. And I hope that one day we can see each other in person so we can realize our dream of our own YouTube show that we talked about, Top Secret.
Yes, our conversation where we can talk about Colorado from two very different experiences, which is like what I love about you is how much you love this place and how much that you've added to it as well. So I appreciate that, and I love your work too. Thank you so much, Julia.
Of course, my pleasure. I'm so happy to be able to do this anytime. Hit me up anytime.
Thank you. Thank you.